Hi everyone, I'm Miranda and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I thought it would be really fun to talk about classic literature. I found the classics tag on BookTube and I thought it sounded like a really fun tag to join in, so I thought that's what I'd do today. I found the tag on Books by Woe channel. I'll put a link to that in the description box down below so you can watch that video. But let's just dive into the questions. So I've got them here on my phone. The first question is, what is an overhyped classic you really didn't like? Well, I think it would be unfair to say that it's overhyped, but a classic that that just isn't really for me is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, which I know is an unpopular opinion because so many people love that book. However, it's just never really been the book for me. I do admire Emily Bronte's writing and her incredible imagination, but I've never understood the passion for Heathcliff. I don't see what other women seem to find so appealing about him. I think he's awful. And in fact, none of the characters in the book are people I can really relate to or empathize or even sympathize with much. So yes, Wuthering Heights is a book that is a classic I've read a few times, but I think in the end I have to realize it's one that will never be amongst my very favorites, shall we say. Next question is, what is your favorite time period to read about? Well, my very favourite time period to read about is the interwar years. I love the literature from that period, and I also just find it such a fascinating time in history. I also love the fashion and the music even. So much I adore from that period. But I also really do enjoy reading about the Victorian era, so I love a lot of Victorian fiction, and of course Regency England, so I love Jane Austen, and I also love the writer Georgette Heyer because she writes a lot about Regency England, and her books are very light but just very witty, and they're amongst my favourite comfort reads. Next question. What is your favourite fairy tale? Question number 3. Well, I think this is probably quite random, but when I was little, I had a collection of fairy tales. I think it was called Old Peter's Russian Tales. I'll see if I can find it, and I'll link these books in the description box down below. It was collected by Arthur Ransom, who is of course famous for the Swallows and Amazons children's books. He was a British writer, but he spent time in Russia, and he published this collection of Russian fairy tales. And there's one fairy tale that I can still remember from that collection. It's called The Silver Saucer and the Translucent Apple. And it's a really bizarre, grotesque tale, but I was just fascinated by it when I was young. I think I was really interested in Russian culture generally when I was little because I did a lot of ballet and I was trained in the Vagonova, in the Russian style. So I was just really fascinated by Russia, and I just remember loving this story. It was about a young girl who was nicknamed Little Stupid or Little Fool by her 2 older sisters because Little Fool was just so kind-hearted. She would do all of the sort of grubby chores that no one else wanted to do, so they called her Little Fool for that. And one day her father goes off to the market and he asks his daughters, what would you like me to bring back for you? Of course, the 2 older sisters ask for fancy jewellery and beautiful dresses, But Little Fool asks only for a silver saucer and a translucent apple. I've seen other translations call it a crystal apple, which makes a little bit more sense. So anyway, the father comes back. He has these gifts for his daughters. The sisters laugh at Little Fool for wanting such a stupid present. But when she gets the saucer and the crystal apple, she spins the apple round and round on the saucer. And by magic, she sees all sorts of scenes from all around the world within this apple. And her sisters become very jealous when they realize what a treasure Little Fool has. So they hatch a truly devilish scheme. They take their sister into the woods to supposedly gather berries. She leaves her apple and her saucer behind with her father, but her sisters think that she has it on her. So they try to force her to give them the apple and saucer. And when she won't, they take an axe that they'd already planted in the wood and they kill her. I think this was the just horrifying part that somehow also just transfixed and fascinated me as a child, that these sisters could just kill one of their own. Anyway, so the terrible deed is done. And to cut a long story short, where they bury Little Fool, a reed grows underneath the tree, and a wandering shepherd comes by and he cuts the reed and he creates a whistle out of the reed. And when he puts it to his lips, this song comes forth that is in the voice of Little Fool, and it tells the story of what happened, what her sisters did to her. The father finds out about this, and in his despair he goes to the Tsar and he takes some water of life from the Tsar's well, sprinkles it over his girl's body, and she comes back to life. And in true fairy tale fashion, she ends up marrying the Tsar and she forgives her sisters. So that is my number one favourite fairy tale. I just adored it when I was young, not quite sure why, but yes, that's my favourite. Question number 4. What is the most embarrassing classic you haven't yet read? Well, I guess I'm quite embarrassed. I haven't read all of Dickens's books, and not a lot of his famous ones. I mean, I have read quite a few, like Great Expectations, Tale of Two Cities, A Christmas Carol, Bleak House, but I really want to read Little Dorrit. I want to read the Pickwick Papers. I have read David Copperfield, but, well, actually I listened to it. I haven't actually read that one, and so I would like to physically read that book. But yeah, there are quite a few Dickens that I haven't read, and I would really like to. Next question. What are the top 5 classics that you would like to read soon? Well, one that's really far up on my classics pile, I actually have it over here. It's Lady Audley's Secret by Mary Elizabeth Braddon, and it just sounds amazing. I'll read you what it says. It says, in this outlandish, outrageous triumph of scandal fiction, a new Lady Audley arrives at the manor, young, beautiful, and very mysterious. Why does she behave so strangely? What exactly is the dark secret this seductive outsider carries with her? A huge success in the 19th century, the book revels in an anti-heroine with her good looks and hidden past, who embodied perfectly the concerns of the Victorian age with morality and madness. I just think that sounds so good. Like I said, I love reading Victorian literature. This sounds like such a classic that I haven't read yet. And yes, I think it just sounds brilliant. I love a book with a good anti-heroine too. So this one's high up on my list. I made a note actually of other classics that I want to read soon. I've already mentioned that I would like to read David Copperfield. I just saw the film, which I really enjoyed, and that inspired me to read the book, because it was a long time ago that I listened to it, and I would like to actually physically read that book as well. So David Copperfield. I also really want to reread The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Bronte. This is actually one of my favourite books, but I haven't reread it for quite a while. And I just think it's such an underrated classic, actually. Anne Bronte is amazing. I wish she was recognised as much as her sisters are. But yes, I think The Tenant of Wildfell Hall still speaks so much to the present, about women who are caught in situations of domestic abuse, for instance. It's a very sort of early feminist book, really, and I think it's very special. So I want to reread that one again. Oh yes, other rereads. I really like rereading classic fiction. I think classic fiction is definitely the type of fiction I reread the most. I think especially because a lot I originally read as a teenager. So this is a case in point. I would really like to reread the Barchester Towers Chronicles by Anthony Trollope. I love his Barchester books. The Warden is the first in this series, and it's actually a really slim, light, but charming read. I really recommend it. I love stories about a village and all of the sort of characters within that small village or town. And Trollope he's so good at character. So I really want to reread these books. I read them a while ago. I've reread The Warden fairly recently, but not many of the others. So I think that would be a fun project for 2020. So I hope that I will be able to do that. And then, oh yes, another book, the fifth book I think this is, that I would like to get to soon is Daniel Deronda by George Eliot. This is a George Eliot novel I haven't read and would really like to. I watched the TV adaptation that was in the early 2000s, and I really enjoyed that at the time, but I didn't go on to read the book, and it's still a book I would really like to read. I think it was the last book that George Eliot wrote, and I think it was also the only one that she wrote that was actually set within her sort of contemporary Victorian society. So I'm interested to read it for that reason as well. Next question. Question number 6. What is your favourite modern book that is based on a classic? Okay, well that would definitely have to be The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow. I adored that book. I've spoken about it before on my YouTube channel. I also interviewed Janice on my podcast, Tea and Tattle. I just adored The Other Bennet Sister. It's about Mary Bennet, and Janice gives Mary such a believable but lovely story. I especially like it because she captures the language, the sort of tone of Jane Austen really, really well in that book. And you can tell how much Janice loves Jane Austen, because to my mind there are a lot of allusions, not just to Pride and Prejudice, but to other works by Jane Austen. So for instance, Mary Bennet, in Janice's imagination, falls in love over poetry, which reminded me of the storyline in Persuasion where Louisa Musgrove falls in love with Captain Benwick over poetry. And then also in The Other Bennet Sister, Mary ends up with 2 potential love interests, and they both remind me of the sort of male versions of Eleanor and Marianne Dashwood in Sense and Sensibility, and I really enjoyed that. So yes, The Other Bennet Sister would be my favourite sort of spin-off from a classic. I also want to give a shout out to Longbourn by Jo Baker, where she writes from the perspective of the servants at Longbourn in Pride and Prejudice. So you you see the characters of the novel and some of the events of the novel play out through the perspective of the servants. And I just think that's such a clever idea, and it was a really, really good read. So yeah, those are my 2 recommendations. Okay, question number 7. What is your favourite movie or TV series based on a classic? Well, that's really easy. That would, of course, have to be the 1995 Colin Firth and Jennifer L. Pride and Prejudice. I still think that that is the absolute best Jane Austen adaptation. I think that's what started my love for Jane Austen, because I watched it when I was 9 years old and I read Pride and Prejudice after that, and the rest, as they say, is history. Okay, next question, question 8. What is the worst classic to movie adaptation? I don't know if it's because I don't much like Wuthering Heights, I've already said, but I have not come across a film adaptation of that I have ever really enjoyed. To be fair, I also I can't think of a Jane Eyre that I absolutely love, and I really like the novel Jane Eyre. So sadly, I don't think the Bronte sisters have done very well in terms of film or TV adaptations. Okay, next question is, what are the favourite editions you'd like to collect more classics from? Well, I really like I've got one. I really like the English Penguin Library editions with the covers designed by Coralie Bickford-Smith. I interviewed Coralie on my podcast and she was so nice to talk to. It was really interesting learning about the designs to these covers. She also does the hardback versions of them too, which I also love. So really like these. They open really nicely, which is important to me when I'm reading a book. So I like the paperbacks a lot. And then I think my favourites are the Virago Modern Classic editions, these hardback editions with the beautiful patterned covers. I absolutely love these. I don't have very many of them, sadly, and quite a few seem to be going out of print, which is disappointing because I think they're beautiful. I'd really like to get more of these. I think they're my favourite, probably, of all the many beautiful series you can get of the classics. They are more modern classics, obviously, these, but I really, really love them. And then I think it's the final question. Yes. What is an underhyped classic you'd recommend to anyone? That would have to be Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. I'm a huge fan of Elizabeth Gaskell. I love Cranford, which is her most well-known work, I think. Many people love this book. But Wives and Daughters, I just don't see it mentioned so much, which I think is such a shame. It's a brilliant, almost like family saga style book to read. It is very thick, and that might put people off a bit. And I think the other thing that also puts people off is that it was the last novel that Elizabeth Gaskell wrote, and very sadly she died before she could finish it, but she did almost get to the end, and she left some notes on sort of what she was planning to have happen at the end, so you do kind of know how it will end, and it's almost there. I think someone has written the ending to sort of finish it up in most editions. But yes, I just love it. I think she's at her best actually in writing that novel, and I would really recommend it if you haven't read it already. But anyway, that was really fun. I hope that you enjoyed watching this video and hearing a bit about my responses to these questions on classic fiction. I'll put the questions in the description box below, and also links to books I've mentioned. But please let me know what are some of your favourite classics? Which classics do you think are underrated that you'd like to see more people read? Are there some classics on your list of books that you want to read this year? I'd really like to know. I'd also like to know if you like Wuthering Heights. Is it just me that doesn't quite get this book and doesn't get the Heathcliff thing? Let me know. But yes, do give this video a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it. Remember to subscribe to my channel, which you can do by clicking on my face, which I think normally comes up around here somewhere. And yes, thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again soon with another video. Bye!